Welcome to the SmartTechCheck Podcast, hosted by Mark Vina, your home for candid, insightful, and provocative conversations about the smart home automation, security, smartphones, PC and console gaming, and much more.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Vina, host of the SmartTechCheck Podcast. Today is Thursday, February 10th, 2022. Joining me for today's podcast is a dynamic duo of Stewart Wolpin, who writes for Popular Mechanics, U.S. News, Techlicious, Investopedia, and other publications. Rob Pegoraro, who writes frequently on tech policy for Wirecutter, PC Magazine, and USA Today. And John Quain, who is not going to be with us today, but he writes for the New York Times, Smart Cities, and Tom's Guide, I should say. Gentlemen, let me bring you up on the screen. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How is your afternoon going after my flubs opening the podcast?
Well, other than the fact that I can't seem to get my goddamn green screen to work, everything is ducky.
Yeah, to the entire audience, we apologize for the fact that Stewart isn't sitting in front of a candy green green screen. He usually has
gone right down the tube here.
I know.
You don't want to see what's behind that green screen. Take my word for it.
You've said that before, and I'll take that into consideration. Hey, before we go into the podcast, because we've got a lot of fun topics to talk about today, I would normally do this at the end, but I really want to get to this. Predictions on the Super Bowl on Sunday. Rob, where are you placing your bet?
I'm placing my bet. I'm really looking forward to the pork shoulder and doing the instant pot. I think it's going to taste good, but I have high confidence in it, and I'm going to go with the Rams.
Going with the Rams? Mr. Stewart?
Well, I've been a Rams fan since I was knee-high to a June bug. So, yeah, I'm going for the Rams simply because I have visions of Roman Gabriel and Jackson Merlin Olsen and Rosie Greer dancing around my head.
You have instantly dated yourself by 30 years.
Well, nobody else will date me, so I guess it's left to me.
Wasn't Merlin Olsen also after his football career ended? Wasn't he on Little House of the Prairie?
He was indeed. And yes, he was. He had a second career as an actor.
Unbelievable.
Much like Alex Karras.
Yes, Alex Karras. There's a lot of guys that made that segue.
And Jim Brown, Fred the Hammer Williamson.
Right. We should do a podcast on that. In fact, I will take it under advice. We should do that on a podcast. But anyway, let's get to the first topic here. Samsung had their Galaxy Unpacked 2022 event yesterday. My reaction to these events, especially since all of this stuff is now being done virtually, this is the second year in a row that Samsung's doing it virtually. Apple's been doing the same thing with their WWDC and all their events. Let me just start this off. I mean, especially the Samsung events. The Samsung events, and I'm not talking about the actual content of what they announced. They have such a highly produced Hollywood-like feel. I really feel like I'm watching a Hollywood, a commercial webinar, that's pre-recorded. So, let me start with Rob. Do you get the same reaction that they're overproduced or too slickly produced? Rob?
Well, whether it's too slick or just right, the effect is the same for a journalist, which is you watch an infomercial. I mean, that's what you and I saw this at CES, but you can actually show up, pick up the thing, see if it's any good, or at least does it feel good in the hand. Right. You're getting more out of it than looking at some lavishly produced video where, everything looks shiny, everything's great, it boots up on the first time, there's no awkward pauses in any apps launching. So, yeah, I'm going to MWC in just over 2 weeks. And usually, in the before times, a Samsung Unpacked event would be part of that, and you could sort of check out the hardware. You would, of course, have 20 minutes while a successful will do the. You can learn how to say.
Yeah, Rob, your audio cut out for a second, but I think I got the gist of what you were saying. Stewart, your reaction to slickly produced infomercials from manufacturers?
Well, I mean, this is obviously, this is nothing new. As a journalist who often needs to cover these kinds of events, what annoys me more is that these are obviously not produced for journalists. Because they are streaming, they draw a lot of the general public to watch them. I don't know what their viewership was, but obviously I would wager that more than half of them were non-journalists. If this was purely for journalists, it would be packed full of make sure you get our names spelled correctly instead of just flashing the name and title on the screen, then pulling them back right away, leaving the specs on the screen for at least a reasonable period of time so we can write down what the hell the specs are. I mean, the valuable information that a journalist needs is always like side loaded. You have to go wait for your email and wait for that to come through. Then you have to go to the website's page to actually get all the specs that you need. These are obviously the production values I just don't care about, because they're, quite frankly, there were events that I went to at CES years ago that would last an hour with product managers droning on forever on every minute little detail. So the production value means nothing. Just give me the information I need so I can write the story without having to go to other sources for information.
Well, I think professors of journalism love that comment. Just give me the facts. Just give me the facts. But getting back to the event itself, and it's always interesting because they do. Samsung routinely does this in the February timeframe. Apple obviously is probably going to refresh some of their phones over the summer, although they won't do their flagship phone until September if they follow their general cadence. And new phones, obviously faster. More extended emphasis on this computational photography path that both the manufacturers are going down, in that, hey, I could actually replace a camera, a discrete camera with a smartphone. You've been able to do that, I think, for the last 2 or 3 years, but now it's getting to the point now that the technology is so incredible from a professionalism standpoint that it's actually hard, I think, in my view, to do incremental features, because you have to be substantially better in night photography or motion photography or whatever mode you're using the camera with, to really demonstrate something that the customer can wrap their head around in terms of seeing the difference. So the other thing that kind of struck me about the announcement, that they announced new tablets, which a ginormous one. I think they announced what it was, like
14.6 inches.
Yeah, which is larger than even the iPad Pro, the larger one.
It's bigger than the screen on this laptop.
Yes, and they also announced, by the way, a keyboard-like product that kind of goes into like a laptop-like mode, very similar to what the iPad does with its keyboard. But what jumped at you? Was there anything special, Rob, that jumped at you from yesterday's announcement?
Not really. I mean, this is a mature product category. They're incremental updates, so it's hard for people to. You shouldn't be that excited about it, and you shouldn't feel bad about not being that excited about it. Smartphones have been around a while, and
right.
Barring some real laws of physics changing breakthrough in battery power, it's little things. I mean, I upgraded my phone, and honestly, the biggest difference between the Pixel 5a I have now and the 3 I had before, the wide-angle lens on the camera. Otherwise, same basic thing. Works the way it did before. It's nice to have 5G, but in everyday use, browsing the web, using apps, I can't tell the difference. No,
just 120 hertz screens, brighter screens. Not to say that those are features that customers wouldn't appreciate it, but there was nothing that was announced yesterday that said to you got to have it. Now, what I thought was interesting, I wrote about this in my blog yesterday. They're giving away Galaxy Buds with pre-orders, which is actually their earbuds. Are probably one of the better buds out there in comparison
to Apple. They could put a headphone jack on the phone too.
They're really good.
I knew you were going to bring that up, Rob. Where's my headphone jack? Stuart, what did you think? Anything jump at you?
Well, the only thing that jumped at me is obviously the Ultra is going to replace the Note, so they're blurring the prosumer device instead of separating it out. And the fact that the stylus, the S Pen, is going to be integrated into the phone itself.
Into the phone itself, yes.
Instead of having to snap on separately. And I think it'll be the only smartphone with that kind of a feature. Obviously, there's the Apple Pencil, but that's really only usable with the iPads. But I want to be careful here from an pure industry point of view, not to mix, and you'll excuse the expression, apples and Samsung oranges. The S Galaxy line does not represent the totality of the Samsung phone line. In fact, it represents quite a small percentage of their annual sales. I think last year Samsung sold, I think, 230 million handsets or 270 million handsets, somewhere in that general vicinity, and only about 25 million of them were S phones. So they make up actually a very, very small percentage, or not a very, very small, but a smaller percentage, certainly compared to Apple. In the fourth quarter of last year, after the iPhone 13 was introduced, Apple sold an estimated 80 to 85 million iPhones just during the quarter. So almost the totality of Apple's phone sales are its flagship models, whereas for Samsung, the vast majority of their cell phone sales, smartphone sales, are their A line. So the event that they had yesterday is primarily exactly what it proposes to be. It's here's what we can do, but what people are actually buying from Samsung, at least, much different. And we also know from market statistics that the budget line phones around the world sell in far greater quantities than the flagship line. So the world between Android and Apple is not only different from the operating system, but the kinds of phones that people buy. The Apple world, which makes up about a third of the world market, 25% of the world market at its best, I think it was 23% last quarter. That's almost all premium phones. The rest of the industry is all sub $500 phones, and a great deal of that is sub $300 phones.
No, and I that's a very insightful observation, Stewart, because, Apple, like many things, they defy gravity when it comes to price points. Most normal companies sell more of the lower end stuff than the higher end stuff. I mean, that's just a rule of marketing and price points, and that wonderful rule called price elasticity. Apple typically, overcomes that. In fact, if anything, they've struggled to try to keep their lower end phones, relevant. The SE. The rumors are they're going to refresh the SE with 5G
next month.
Right, but typically people who buy an iPhone typically buy higher end models. So that's a very sad.
They don't make anything else. The SE sells 10 million units last year. The last year's model of the SE, I think, sold around
2
million units.
I like the way you said it. Only 10 million. Only 10 million. Okay.
Well, that's about as many units as Samsung's FE models sell. Yeah. And it's being caught by, Rob was talking about it, unless there's something really earth-shakingly different, foldable models. The sales of foldable models quadrupled last year, and Samsung alone, I think, is like 85 or 90% market share in the foldables market. Their fold phones sold about 8 million units. That's a total guesstimate because they don't release those kinds of figures, but we're thinking that they sold around 8 million foldables. So the foldable category, which is something brand spanking new, is beginning to make an impact. And a lot of other companies, I think all the Chinese makers are now either planning their first or about to introduce folding phones. And the rumors are still rife that maybe not this year, but next year, Apple. And once Apple jumps into the foldable, now it becomes, that's sort of the bona fide, the imprimatur that will make the category real. So the fact that Samsung is selling almost as many foldable phones as it is their FE models is, I think, telling for the industry and indicates the direction the industry may be going.
Well, we need to move to the next topic, but I can't wait till Apple announces their foldable phone and then makes the claim during the announcement that they're the first ones to invent the foldable phone. I will bet you money that will happen. Rob, this is a topic that you brought up. When we were exchanging emails back and forth yesterday. You want to talk a little bit about this FCC nutrition label, and I think it's a good idea myself, but would like to get why don't you educate the audience on this and give us your view on that?
So this is a rule that the FCC is going to write that will require internet providers to tell potential customers what they're going to get, which you'd think the market would see to, but
it's common sense, right?
It's not a competitive market. And so, for fun, I looked up what will Comcast offer. I don't think it's exactly your address, Mark, but I think it's in at least the same neighborhood. So I'm looking here. Xfinity, super fast, internet, 600 megabits per second, asterisk. Asterisk says 600 megabits per second download speed. Below that, actual speeds vary and are not guaranteed. Wait a minute. What's the upload speed? What is it? For more details, visit dataplan.xfinity.com. If you know that data plan is French for Comcast data cap, then you know that you're going to be stuck with a 1.2 terabyte data cap that at 600 megs down, you'll probably bust through pretty soon. And this, like the page itself is nicely designed. They hired someone who's reasonably good at graphic design. It's not telling me basic things I need to know as a customer.
Right.
And so, what is the uploads? Let me just figure it out. What do we have?
Probably 19 or 20.
This must be it. Xfinity Internet Broadband Disclosures. Let's see here. Upload. Nope, not on that page. Wait a minute. Where is this?
Stewart, what's your take on while Rob is doing some
So
searching here?
Well, usually upload speeds are usually between 15 and 25 megabits.
Yeah, right.
You don't usually get any great variance in that area. But what strikes me funny is that everything that Rob just said might as well have been in Klingon to the average consumer.
User.
If they decide whatever they decide to put in this nutrition label is going to be indecipherable to most consumers. And I'll tell you a quick story. My wife works for a nonprofit, and the Wi-Fi in the thrift store that the nonprofit runs is god awful. So I said to my wife, take a picture of the label so I could see what equipment it is, and I'll suggest how to improve it. Well, it turns out the ARRIS modem that they have is 10 years old and only runs Wi-Fi 4. The router, for some reason, is of more recent vintage and runs Wi-Fi 5. And so I'm trying to explain to her the differences between Wi-Fi 4 and Wi-Fi 5, trying to explain the difference between a modem and a router, and trying to explain what each of those things do. Now, when you're talking about this level of basic information that those of us here is like pig Latin, I mean, we just understand that. Most consumers don't have a clue. Even if they put in their 600 megabits per second speed, most consumers would go, I don't know what that means. How many devices can I run on that? Can I be watching a movie in 4K on Netflix while my son plays Minecraft online and my wife works and does a Zoom call at the same time? None of these specs that I see listed, packet loss, latency rate, none of these are in English to most consumers. So simply putting the label on doesn't help us.
But you're making the point.
Matter.
Yeah. See, I guess
don't speak network terminology. It's basic respect to the customer to tell what you're going to sell.
I mean, here's
I'm not disagreeing with that. Just put it in English.
That test.
No, Rob, guys, what the carriers and the ISPs will say, any label that you pull together, by definition, is going to have so many asterisks and so many exceptions to it that it's not going to be meaningful. Now, I don't buy that, by the way. I don't buy that. I think there's a baseline 3 or 4 data points, to Stewart's point, that is digestible, that is understandable, that you should be able to put on a label. I mean, they've been able to solve this for food for 40 years, for 50 years, so I mean, there are analogous arguments you can make. Well, food labels could be misleading in some way. I think that you could get to 3 or 4 very digestible, very understandable metrics, because I got to tell you, the moment you put on a label, go to this website to get more details or find the birdseed, the caveats, you've lost the customer. So I agree. I agree with what you're saying, Stewart. I just hope I hope they don't blow this up, because I think it's a good idea. I just think they should agree to those baseline metrics.
What will happen, because this is actually now a legal requirement. The broadband infrastructure bill, the Internet IIJA, I forget what it stands for. Anyways, the infrastructure law includes a provision requiring that the FCC write this. So it's happening. The question is, what details do you want to put in? And it's fair to say, like, will packet loss mean anything to normal human beings? Maybe not. But the thing about a label is you can, once all the information is going to be in the same spot, wherever you shop, you can just tell people, look at this line. If it says anything under data cap, you've got a problem.
Right.
If the upload speed is not close to the download speed, Maybe you don't want that if you work from home. And people manage to shop for food, even though they don't necessarily look at every single line on the food label. But people who want to know all those details can. And yeah, in a functioning market, you wouldn't need this. There isn't a nutrition label requirement for showing fees for airlines, but the airline industry is much more competitive than residential broadband in the United States. And so, I certainly have no sympathy for internet providers who are going to complain that they have to devote people to put these labels together, because if they could just tell people what they're going to buy, we wouldn't have gotten into this position.
Right.
And remember,
well, a lot of the problem also is that there's such limited competition in some markets. There is just no other choice. So even if you know what you're going to get or what you're going to buy, it's not going to help you because that's the only thing you can buy.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That is a whole separate issue. But at least then you'll know what a bad deal you're getting up front instead of being surprised later on.
Well, we could talk about this forever because it's so funny that everyone at least the three of us agree that this is a good that at a high level this is a good thing
by
to happen.
Nothing votes.
It's all in the execution.
Yeah, the devil's in the details. I was about to exactly say that. We got to get to this topic because we were talking about this before the podcast started. This revelation that 14 and 15 U.S. cabinet departments have bought the unlocking technology from Cellebrite, which is one of several companies that has this call it sophisticated hacking tools that agent. The FBI has bought these tools. The governments, not just our government, but other governments have purchased this tool. I mean, I have to, correct, Stewart, Rob, because you're in the Lion's Den down there in good old Washington, D.C. You got to help me with this because I used to think when I read because I'm a pretty plugged in person when it comes to, the way the federal government's supposed to work. Isn't just the Justice Department and the FBI by extension supposed to be the entity that is supposed to go out and get warrants and before you obviously go into a house?
I'm surprised because when Cellebrite, this is this Israeli firm, they sell a box. You can plug an iPhone into it and basically take over the iPhone, regardless of all the features Apple has built into iOS. Apparently, they found workarounds. They were not just about selling it to the FBI or presumably other three-letter agencies, but local
anybody,
departments, county police departments. So I'm not super surprised but I do have to wonder, why? The Cellebrite box is not the most expensive piece of kit you could buy, but this is not like a status symbol. It's not something you buy because the agency one block away in Independence Avenue also has one. That's not how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, no, I got that, Rob. But I mean, isn't it kind of disturbing though? Again, the topic here, what a private individual does, that could be against the law as well. I don't know what the law would be on that. If Stewart went out and bought that Cellebrite box and decided to use that on Rob because he just doesn't like Rob and he wants to find out what secrets he has on his phone. I don't know what that. I suspect the law probably says you have to own for that to be legal, you have to own the phone that you're using that tool with. My issue is that do we have cabinet departments that are using that technology or other technologies without getting warrants? That's the thing that really kind of scares me, frankly, because that's not the way it's supposed to work. Stewart, your thoughts?
Well, according to the company itself, they have 2,800 government customers. And I also, from what I understand,
North America alone.
Well, yeah. I mean, Fish and Wildlife. Apparently, it works on both iPhone and Android, and the device has to be physically present to plug into the machine. So it's not like it could do anything remotely. Right. But to Mark's point, I agree 100%. But this is just one in a million cases of technology racing ahead of the law, and of government's inability to keep up with the law in terms of regulation and the law. So whether or not someone needs a warrant to break into a phone, I think this all stems from that San Bernardino shooter and the FBI asking Apple to break into the shooter's phone and Apple going, no, we have to protect our users' protection. So that it all stems from that. And I don't think that the government has gone an inch into figuring out whether or not they need probable cause. And I'm not a lawyer and I do not play one on a green screen. whether or not they need probable cause, whether or not they need a warrant. I don't think anybody in the law has figured this out. I think the only way that that's going to be adjudicated is if somebody who's arrested for a crime or held by Homeland Security in an airport and realizes that their phone has been broken into, files suit. Because I think that is the only way that this is ever going to get to a court to adjudicate the legality of this device being used by the government.
Right. And Rob, the point you made before the call, and the point that you made, Stewart, a few moments ago, is that this Cellebrite tool requires you to have the phone physically. This is not a remote tool. Now, having said that, there are companies out there that do have these intriguing remote spyware tools that you don't even have to click on the link, and your phone's infected, and you don't even know you're being surveilled. I think the question is, well, how many of those agencies have bought that technology? I mean, this story was about Cellebrite. Didn't talk any, and I don't believe in any detail about whether these cabinet departments have purchased these remote tools that you guys were referencing. But that's the thing that concerns me.
With NSO Group, we do know that from a story in the Washington Post where they were trying to get the FBI as a customer, and the FBI, I guess, did buy that to see could we use this, because they did code their spyware tool to not go after U.S. phones. It was just really fascinating set of stories the Post has done, basically pointing out how NSO sort of functioned as a bit of a foreign policy tool for the Israeli government, where they could say, oh, looks like you and the United Emirates are getting a little friendlier with us. If you do us this favor here, we'll sell you this tool you can use to go after your dissidents there. And they were trying to figure out, could they get into the U.S. market? Cellebrite is different because, you need physical access to the device. You need custody of it. But 14 and 15 cabinet departments. And it is unclear. The story, by the way, is in The Intercept, theintercept.com. Y'all should read it because, I as taxpayers, as people with interests in the Fourth Amendment, we should know what the heck these agencies are doing, spending taxpayer dollars to buy this tool that doesn't seem to have a whole lot of relevance, certainly for things like enforcing fish and wildlife laws.
Well,
maybe there's some very tricky fish out there.
It could be. We got to hit the next topic, but just a reminder, Rob, don't leave your phone unattended around Stewart, because
I never do.
He may already have got that Cellebrite tool in his house somewhere. This is an intriguing one. This actually is pretty big news. Lots of implications, but the Nvidia ARM deal fell apart. Lots of media reports says that's probably not a bad thing, honestly, for a whole bunch of different reasons. But Stewart, let me start with you. Let me get your perspective on good, bad. Well,
it's Nvidia is disappointed, but I think they should be thrilled that this fell apart, because I think ARM is a little bit in trouble. Their owner SoftBank just I think they appointed a new CEO to the company. He's talking about taking them public, but the biggest problem, or the biggest issue in this whole deal, and why Nvidia should be happy about it and ARM should be unhappy, is the rise of RISC-V, which is an open source chip architecture that is being promoted by a lot of companies who I guess are tired of being dependent on ARM architecture. Just 2 days ago, Intel started a $1 billion fund for the development and advancement of RISC-V architecture.
Yes.
And so if RISC-V ends up getting a lot more support amongst the chip and device makers rather than ARM is in big trouble, and Nvidia will be happy that they really dodged a bullet here.
RISC, for those unfamiliar with it, is short for reduced instruction set computing, not risk as in bad things.
That is correct. Sorry, I should have.
Thank you for that educational
Thank you,
Rob. Thank you. Rob, your view.
I trying to remember anyone who was happy to see news of Nvidia trying to buy ARM. And in this case, you sort of want that company to be a little more like Switzerland and not be a subsidiary of some company that can then, Nvidia is huge in graphics chips. They are a big industry player in their own right. And so that struck me as weird. And I am surprised how quickly it fell apart. I mean, when did they announce it? This was, of course, I've lost all sense of time. It could have been 2 months ago. It would feel like 2 years. When was this announced again?
Oh, it was several months ago. It was the middle of last year, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, but usually people try to stick it out with making a merger happen for longer. I mean, AT&T spent a good year trying to make its T-Mobile purchase happen, and then they finally gave up on that.
Yeah.
I think in some ways this is comparable. If Nvidia had made this deal, it may have ended up the way that the Time Warner Atari deal ended up.
Right.
Atari might have been, Atari wanted more control over the industry and to enlarge itself, but they might have been buying it. If they'd bought it, it might have been a ticking time bomb if RISC-V ends up being adopted by a large, by everybody who's right now using ARM architecture in their chips.
Right. And it's interesting because, the NVIDIA thing, and NVIDIA is obviously a massive company, and, they're placing big butts and investments in the auto space. They've been a legend in computer graphics and other product categories. This very well could have been a major distraction for them, even if you could agree that the deal was intelligent and it was accretive in the sense that it grew NVIDIA's reach into a space that they may not, have a natural foray into. To the point you're making, sir, I think is a reasonable one in that this could be a blessing in disguise. The way the chips are falling on this. Any last thoughts? Rob, any last thoughts?
You mentioned SoftBank, and they don't have the best record of stewardship of tech properties or tech-related properties. So, I'm not sure ARM has the best set of owners right now, but they're going to have to figure it out. Yeah,
they are. Well, let's get to the last topic here. This is, we promised John, who's not on the podcast, that we talk about this, and that is the ongoing Joe Rogan Spotify saga. I think it's amusing to a degree. I just saw the news this morning that Rogan turned down the was it Rumble? Didn't Rumble offer him $100 million, the same type of deal, and he turned it down officially. My viewpoint on this is that Spotify as a private company can have whoever they want to on the podcast, and people are given the leeway to opine and say, well, we think that Spotify, you should drop this guy because you don't like the content of their podcast. That's completely reasonable. However, having said that, there is, even with private companies that are, managing the availability of this content, and obviously Spotify is probably the big one in the podcast space, along with Apple. I get a little bit nervous around the fact, especially when you have music legends weighing in saying, well, if you don't kick this guy off, you're going to take me off the podcast. Now, in this particular situation, we talked about this last week. This was a business decision first and foremost. Joe Rogan has a substantially bigger following than some of these music legacy music guys that were complaining about. I don't like his content. It's either he or me, that kind of thing. But I do think that the issue about is this censorship? Is this and I know that's hard to it's hard to frame in a private context because they can have on the other podcasts whoever they like, but I get a little bit nervous about the free speech aspects of this. So with that, let me start with Stewart and get his opinion.
Well, I agree with everything that you say. And the thing that we're working a little bit in the dark here, because we don't know what the contractual relationship between Spotify and Joe Rogan is, whether or not Spotify has any control or input into the content of the show, and whether or not there are any penalties involved. And I think if Joe Rogan is sincere in his apologies about the misinformation, the COVID misinformation, and his use of the N-word and that whole Planet of the Apes contretemps, that maybe Spotify should, at least if they don't have any control over his content, advise that he bring on Neil Young as against, that he bring on Andrea Arya as India. I can't get her name right. Sorry.
Was it Joan Baez and she complained?
It could. In other words, instead of simply apologizing for being a dick, I don't think that they should get rid of him because, again, I think whenever you tell somebody don't look, you cause them more problems. For instance, Whoopi Goldberg being suspended from The View was idiotic. I'm a Jew, and that was an idiotic thing to do. You want dialogue. You don't want punishment. It was just dumb, and I think that's the same case here. You give him the opportunity to bring people on from the other side who obviously have a disagreement with him and let them have the conversation, especially since the conversation they're going to have is going to be heard or seen by people who agree with Joe Rogan most of the time and would open up the dialogue. So
Right.
I think the solution is don't take him off, don't leave him alone, but encourage him to bring on these other voices, even if it's just to berate him.
You know, Stewart, you're a very erudite man. Even though I don't agree with your baseball affiliation, you're a very, very articulate guy. And, really, only because this does have a segue into the whole Whoopi Goldberg thing to a degree, because I do think that was idiotic to kick her off while they suspended her for 2 weeks.
Right.
They're probably going to bring her back. I don't think she's going to get fired.
Oh, no, she won't. But just that was just dumb.
No, that was window dressing. That was, ABC, we're doing something, and the reality is that when someone makes an absolutely asinine comment like she did, to me, the idea is I used to work for a CEO who used to say, sunshine was the greatest antiseptic, because when you see stupid stuff like that, you don't want to hide it because, hey, let the world see it and let the world make their evaluation on the idiocy or the insight of something like that. So, Rob, what's your view on this whole Joe Rogan Spotify saga?
Yeah, I can see why they're not going to get rid of them because first of all, their basic business model, why did they spend $100 million to get a podcast? Because that's easier to monetize. You can run ads on it that have really high value. You don't have to license the content, one record label at a time. Spotify, everything, it's got to be a deal with one label, one artist. There's no compulsory license like what you have that allows a non-interactive service like Pandora to operate at a slightly lower cost. But yeah, I think the answer is, I certainly hope that, in that quasi apology Joe Rogan did 2 weeks ago, saying I have had people on the podcast like Peter Hotez, the vaccine scientist from Baylor, Sanjay Gupta, and so on, get more people like that on. I hope people are if they're getting those invitations, they're accepting them. I hope that's also true of climate scientists, since apparently he had another climate change denier on just yesterday, I guess. I can't keep up with this stuff. And yeah, in the meantime, if artists don't like being associated with them, God bless them. That's completely their right to say, because of the way Spotify runs, they can say, it's me or him, and if you're not going to get rid of him, then you don't get my music. They can take it off immediately, and Spotify has to comply. That's the free market at work. And, as long as I'm not getting to Spotify by typing spotify.gov, this is not a free speech issue.
No, I agree with everything you just said. And to me, it's just amusing. It's amusing that no one complained when Barry Manilow said, you know what, it's either me or you got to kick off Joe Rogan. Oh, that wasn't Barry Manilow. That was probably somebody else. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting. I don't know where this ends up, but I just think that the way you get to, the solution to me to bad speech is more free speech. I just think that more transparency about different points of view. Typically the people who have opinions that can't be substantiated or they're off the charts, they tend to become, almost irrelevant, frankly. Because
Spotify, Rogan's to apologize, the COVID misinformation apology, the 10 minutes or so, and that one for using the N-word, there did seem to be a recognition that, that was wrong.
Yeah. He
actually used more colorful. Are we subject to FCC jurisdiction? Can I say the F word here? He did a lot in the second one. If you're saying I'm not racist, then you fucked up.
Well, it's going to be.
I hope you're never too old to learn or too rich to learn, Mr. Rogan. So I hope you're prepared to do that.
Well, I wish my podcast had the weight where I could say, you know what, Apple, you don't kick off this guy and, you can't keep my podcast. I suspect that probably argument would not go very far. But guys, listen, thanks for taking the time to join me for today's podcast. For our viewing and listening audience, thank you for making the Smart Tech Check podcast part of your day or commute for that matter. Please make sure that you hit the like and subscribe buttons at the end of today's podcast. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter at MarkVinaTechGuy. And until next time, have a great week and go Bengals. That's who I'm going to be rooting for. Got to go for the underdog.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Go ahead.